To you, Dr. Dasgupta.
Perfect. Thank you, Susan. So I'm really happy to introduce our three speakers today. It's an encore performance. So they're going to be talking to us today about the contractual work required for investigator-initiated multi-center studies. And I'm in the midst of one of these now, and we're very lucky to have our contracts office here because it's a very complicated process. So we have with us Carolyn Pereira. She's a lawyer and a contract specialist. She's been with the RI-MUHC for the last 2 years, but she has 15 years of experience as a legal coordinator and a business law expert in Brazil, France, and here in Canada. Marie-Luce Fortier, also legal counsel, lawyer. She's licensed in Ontario and Quebec, and she's worked at various places, including the CHU and the CHUM and Saint-Justin, but now she's come to the best place, the RI-MUHC, and she's been with us for the last 3 years. And then, of course, our own Costas Karatzas, who can get us anything that we need. And so he's the Director of Business Development and Contracts and co-director of the DCAT. He's a Ph.D. and McGill alumnus, does some molecular biology on the side, and he really guides this enterprise, which I think is one of the, I can loosely call it a platform, but it's an essential piece in our work at CORE. So welcome to all three of you.
Thank you, Kaberi. Always your kind words. And I even serve food and I bring coffee if need be. That's my evening job. Great to see everyone, familiar faces. I hope you're all keeping safe and well. For a change today, I'm not going to be talking about, because we have an anatomy class, correct? We gave the title Dissecting. So I will let my two good expert colleagues, the specialists, to go through the presentation, which is really, as we discussed with Kaberi and Dominique, we wanted this to be a series of learning kind of practices, and that's exactly why Marie-Luce and Caroline will get you through the presentation. So with no further delay, I will turn the floor to Marie-Luce and Caroline, and of course I'll stay at the end to get the difficult questions. If there is anything good, please give credit to my colleagues. If there's anything or anyone to blame, I take the blame. So let me know. Good to see you all.
Thank you, Dr. Dasgupta and Costas. So today we're going to be talking about interinstitutional multi-center agreements and investigator initiated. So as you may see, we're going to go a bit through the general considerations, talk about a bit about the content on the interinstitutional agreements, funding, etc. How we connect all of this with the R&B. I'm going to bring to you two examples of this multi-center project. And then we're going to conclude talking a bit about the best practices and lessons learned from all the experience you have been facing the last 2 years. So let's start with the general considerations. So when you talk about multi-center study, we know that the study team always have a lot of preparation, preparing the study on the science side, on the administrative side. But again, we just want to bring up that we also need to prepare the contractual structure of the multi-center study. The more we talk, the earlier we start discussing that structure, the better, because what you're gonna see through our presentation is that all the agreements that come out from the multi-center study need to be somehow related and need to be concise. So what is the multi-center study? In this specific case, we're going to be talking about investigator-initiated multi-center studies, because you can have other kinds that comes to us where we are just participating in a multi-center. So we're going to focus on the multi-centers, the investigator-initiated option, where it's our institution, our PIs that starts the study. So one of the steps that involves putting together a study like that is start asking some questions like who's providing the funding, who take the sponsor role, because let's again remind ourselves that when you talk about being sponsored in a study, we're talking about obligations towards Health Canada, like obtaining the non-objection letter. We're talking about talking to the DARS about insurance in specific cases, because some of those studies will not be covered by the regular insurance we have for research. Who will manage the trial, and so on. So we start putting together all the pieces that we need to also have the contractual structure of that multicenter along with all the other steps that are needed. So when you talk about a structure, we talk about usually how we're going to structure what are the agreements that will be needed for that study. So we can have, for example, a consortium agreement where all the participant sites will be on the same agreement. This it's a very good choice for specific studies, not all of them, because when you have, for example, participant sites all around the globe, it might be challenging to be discussing governing law and jurisdiction, privacy, and things like that. So again, as I mentioned, it's always good to sit down from the beginning to analyze the study that is going to be taking place, so we can decide together what are the best options in terms of agreements to put in place. Usually what we have been using more is the interinstitutional agreements with each participant site, because then we can negotiate specificities of each site with them. So sometimes it is the best option depending on the project. We may also have services agreement attached to the project if you're hiring nursing services, if you're hiring a company to run some tests for you. Sometimes it's just providing the drug, for example, manufacturing the drug. So there's all kinds of services that can be attached to those studies that need to be taken into consideration as well when you're putting together the structure of this project. And of course, there's the funding agreements. Usually there's all kinds of, sometimes it's private funding, sometimes it's the public funding, but you also have different and separate agreements to concerning the funding part. It's always important also to let us know where exactly are the participant sites, what are the roles, what they're doing. Sometimes, for example, you may have one international site that is taking the sponsorship of that study for that area. You may be working only with Quebec institutions. So there's all of these facts that need to be taken into consideration when putting together the structure of the study, and what kind of agreements we'll be needing for the project. So when we start talking to the participant sites, when you start choosing the sites you want to work with in the project, there are a few things that we would advise you to start negotiating beforehand, or at least try to start talking about beforehand. For example, IP, intellectual property. This is very important to ensure and make clear who owns any IP that can come out of the study. Ownership of data. There's the raw data, that's the results. Sometimes you're creating a biobank. So there's a lot of discussions concerning the data that need to be discussed with the participant side, so it's clear for them who have the ownership of those. Publication as well. Will all of the sites be co-authors? Will be just mention that they provided data, for example? So it depends also on how implicated each site is on the study. What exactly is their role? Again, as we mentioned before, what is the role they're taking in the study? So we can decide on the publications. Of course, there's the budget and the funding. Let's also say that it's important to make it clear that we only be paying them when we have the money. What is the expectations in terms of budgets that they have? Because sometimes you might realize you don't have enough, and for them to run that kind of study, they will need more money. So again, it's important to have those conversations before we start drafting something. It's always good also to ask them if they have some specificities or regarding legislation. We have nowadays the GDPR in Europe, which is the privacy legislation concerning all the data and the privacy, private information in Europe. Sometimes it may be a challenge to receive data from Europe because, as you know, we are not compliant with this legislation as of today. So this is something that needs to be discussed if you are involving European sites in your study. As I mentioned before as well, let's keep the conversation from the beginning. Contact us as soon as you are putting together the structure of our study. We can create a workflow. We can decide what agreements will be required. What else needs to be considered when we can discuss with you the study, better understand what is needed, what is expected, who is involved, and then again, as soon as we, if we are contacted from the beginning, it's easier that all the agreements are done in a way where there's no lack of obligations that would need to be here, or they are saying different things because they're done at different times. So it's important to always, if you have the whole picture, we can put together a better structure in terms of contract. Always remember, for example, the funding agencies, sometimes they include obligations in the agreements that we need to assign to the participant sites in terms of, for example, mentioning them in a publication or giving us some reports, some financial reports every year, every 6 months, whatever it's mentioned there. So if we look at the project as a whole, we are able to include all those obligations in the agreements with the sites. So we are compliant with what we signed with the funding agencies. So that's why it's important that the agreements are interconnected. Let's talk a bit now specific about the content of the Investigator Initiated. So here we have a few of the important topics to consider when we are drafting the interinstitutionals, the Investigator Initiated, I'm sorry. So the first one would be the sponsor role and obligations. Then we have the sponsor role, specifically the non-objection letter with Health Canada, budget and funding, indemnification insurance. This is very important, has been a very challenging issue that we have been facing, specifically with the COVID trials, with Investigator Initiated that have participant sites abroad. So this is something that we really need to be careful about. Intellectual property and publications, ownership of data and results, privacy issues, management of study drugs, governing line jurisdiction. So when you talk about sponsor role and obligations, let's, again, when you talk about Investigator Initiated, it means that someone on our side needs to be the sponsor of the study, right? What has been decided for the last year and a half maybe, is that at our institution, the RI-MUHC is the sponsor of the study, and the principal investigator is the medical director. Why we took that decision? Because as you may know, the RI-MUHC is covered by the insurance that is managed by the DARS, and the principal investigator, since it's not an employee of the institution, but has just privileges to do research here, he's not covered by that same insurance. So the decision was to make the RI-MUHC the sponsor. So we, at least for a lot of the obligations that the RI is taking, being the sponsor, would be covered by that insurance. So that's where this decision came from. So again, as I mentioned, the sponsor takes a lot of responsibilities, especially with Health Canada. For example, all the adverse events reporting, everything that is related to the drug, such as drug handling, labeling, disposing, destruction of the drug, and so on. We're going to put, after the presentation, you're going to see there's an appendix where you can see all the obligations that the sponsor has, what may be assigned to a CRO. So this is a very interesting document to take a look after. We need to make the registration of the study with clinicaltrials.gov and so on. So there's a lot of, when we sometimes we hear a few PIs that I'm taking the role as the sponsor, there's nothing. No, we need always to keep in mind that being a sponsor means we are assuming a lot of responsibilities, and it has a lot of documentation and obligations that comes with taking that responsibility. One of them is obtaining the non-objection letter from Health Canada. How do we do that? So you need to fill out the form 3011 from Health Canada. We need to be a bit careful when filling this out to ensure that we are putting the right name as the sponsor, having it signed by the good person that has the power to sign the form. We have been seeing a few forms that are not correctly filled out. We know that sometimes we don't have a figure of someone in the RI that is responsible for helping fill out this kind of document. But again, let us know, because I know that our team has a lot of experience, and we may help you to check if everything is filled out correctly. So as the sponsor, when you become the sponsor before Health Canada, it means that you're responsible for all the sites in Canada. So please remember that all the sites that are here will be under the RI-MUHC, which means that everything that I mentioned before, for example, the adverse event that you have to report to Health Canada, if it happens elsewhere in another institution in Canada, it's up to us to do that report to Health Canada. Again, that's the one important thing to remember is that we need to disclose to the DARS. The DARS is, again, the agency that manages our insurance. If you have sites outside Canada or studies that involves pregnant women, to confirm insurance and coverage. Again, this and COVID files as well. Again, this is just when we're talking about investigator initiated that are taking place outside Canada with pregnant women, or that's COVID related.
Mm-hmm.
I'll leave my colleague now.
Thank you, Caroline. That was very complete. I think I will probably repeat some information or maybe go over some things faster, because you did give a lot of information and it's good. I mean, okay. So if we're now just like trying to focus on maybe budget and funding, and Caroline did mention that before, we need to, like, when we're receiving funds and we have an agreement with a funding entity, there are always conditions, or most of the time, unless it's an unrestricted educational grant, maybe there are not a lot of obligations. But if it's another type of agreement from a pharmaceutical company providing funds, or from other entities, usually there are conditions that are attached to these funds. So we really have to be careful, because when we agree to these conditions, we also have to impose the same conditions on the participating sites and other service providers that are involved and will be using the same money, okay? So, and Caroline said it, like, let's make sure we have funds before we agree to pay funds to other parties. We need to make sure that the funds are available and that they will continue to be available. For example, if you have milestones in the agreement with the pharma company, they will only provide the funds when you recruit 5 patients and then 10 patients and I don't know how many patients. You have to make sure that you do not agree in a separate agreement with the participating sites to give them all the money up front if you're only receiving it as per milestones. So this needs to be consistent. Okay, so when we receive funds, we can be paying funds to participating sites in budgets that, you know, like Caroline said, it's always good to try to see in advance if the sites will be willing to agree to your budget, because we've had cases where maybe the funds are not sufficient and we sent out 15 agreements and we've negotiated them. And then 6 months down the line, they're saying, oh, there's not enough money. You know, there's a lot of work involved with negotiating contracts. So it's always good to have a clear idea from the beginning. Can you continue to have good communications with your participating sites so there are not as many surprises maybe. So again, when we use a contractual research organization or academic research organization, CRO or ARO, we have to be careful only to pay with milestones, again, to make sure we're not just paying hours worked without any results. And service providers, the same thing. Another thing maybe we didn't mention is that we need to be careful because if, let's say, we have public funding and we want to pay money to a service provider, then maybe la loi sur les contrats avec les organismes publics will apply. It means that we may have to go to tender or we may have to like publish on the government's website. Anyway, there are other conditions. So check with us before you choose a service provider, depending on the funds that you want to use. Next slide. Okay, budget and funding. Like Caroline said before, all the agreements need to be interconnected. The obligations need to be mirrored. Like if we have certain obligations, we have to impose them on our collaborators. So in interinstitutional agreements. And if we're the sponsor, we also need to impose some of the things on the participating sites because we have the obligations as a sponsor. For example, we want them to give us or report the serious adverse events so that we can report them to Health Canada. Okay, insurance. Caroline explained before that la Direction des assurances du réseau de la santé et services sociaux, the DARS, is the entity making sure that we have insurance coverage in all the hospitals in the province, the research centers, and the research institutes, like our research institute. In the comprehensive policy that we have from the DARS, there is one exhibit called Protection des activités de recherche clinique PARC. And this is what is important for us. So this is where it's about maybe 20 pages where they put like the what we should do as a insured institution, so that we should put contracts in place, that we should like disclose the trials, like she said, for pregnant women. Now there's COVID, since the COVID happened, now we have to report, when we are the sponsor, we have to report the study to them. Remote trials, the patients are receiving drugs at home, they have to enter data at home. You know, there are some trials like that that are considered a little bit more risky for the DARS, so they want to be aware of these. And if we have sites in other countries that are conducting our protocol, the DARS also wants to know. The DARS will study, like when we have weird or different cases like this, we'll submit that to them and they will study all the documents that we provide to them, and they will let us know if they cover us, the conditions, how they will cover us. Sometimes they need to buy a different insurance in another country because of the country specific requirements. And sometimes they'll tell us, we will not cover you because it's out of our coverage. So then we have to turn around and try to obtain our own insurance. Next. Intellectual property and publications. So Caroline did mention before, but maybe in more detail. So of course, when we're negotiating agreements with the pharmaceutical companies, they want to keep all the intellectual property, especially related to the drug or the device that they are bringing into the collaboration. We want to keep the right to publish, of course. This is really important for our investigators. And sometimes we also want to think about the right of participating sites to publish within the agreement we have with the pharma company, for example, so that then we can allow the participating sites maybe to publish after a certain time or things like that under certain conditions. When we discover things, or in the case we discover anything, we want to be able to keep a license for non-commercial use of the intellectual property and the results for an academic use within our institution. Again, we're repeating, do not forget, we have to mirror the obligations that we have with a funding entity, and we have to impose the same obligations on the participating sites. And please send us all the relevant documents so that we have the whole story. Surprises are never good. Now, privacy issues, Caroline mentioned it before, the GDPR is a headache for us, especially because they are imposing on us to have a data protection officer to be able to protect all the data coming from Europe. They have this extraterritoriality, I'm not sure I'm saying it right, clause. So even if it's a law in Europe, they are imposing it on us, or that's what they want to do. They want to impose that on our territory. So it's very difficult to negotiate that we just want to comply with our laws. They want us to comply with their laws. And if we do not comply with their laws, they will want to be able to fine us very expensive fines. It can, I think some entities were fined like 20 million euros or big amounts like that in Europe if there are some leakage of personal information, or if we're not handling the personal information correctly. So it's very strict. It's the strictest regulation on the planet right now, and all the countries are trying to adapt their internal laws to be compliant with this one. So this is a new challenge for us. When you have sites in Europe and they will send data to you, it's good to think about it before and try to see, is this like a must for your collaboration? Or maybe you could have data from other places and this will be less contractual headaches. Okay, management of study drugs, Caroline mentioned it. So if we become a sponsor, we become responsible for the study drug. Of course, the manufacturing, let's say, if it was done by a pharma company, we can negotiate that they are responsible for the quality of the drug. But sometimes we have investigators that will ask like a company to create a drug, a generic drug, for example. So we need to make sure to properly negotiate the clauses regarding the drug. And also, as a sponsor, we have the responsibility of labeling the drug with the new indication. So let's say a drug was used for asthma, but now we want to use it for COVID. It needs to be labeled with the new COVID indication as per Health Canada, the non-objection letter. So again, it's a big responsibility to become a sponsor. We just wanted to bring to your attention like the different links that we have with the Research Ethics Board. So just 3 bullet points. So we need consistency with the Research Ethics Board. So all the documents that are submitted at the in Nagano, we need to be aware of them, especially if they change the relationship, the collaboration with the participating sites, you know, if there are new things that we're not aware of. So please keep us updated. Sometimes you will send an amendment to the protocol and it will have an impact on the agreements as well. Most of you, I suppose, know about the convenance or the site-specific assessment in Nagano, and the contract is part of this site-specific assessment. So we have a contract trigger that will be opened when a contract is needed, depending on the questions. If you answer yes to some of the questions in the F11 form, it will open a contract trigger. And to close that trigger, we have three choices, I think. One of them is contract is not required. Sometimes the contract trigger was open, but at the end, we decide that, okay, you know what, in this collaboration, you don't need an agreement for such and such reason. It's only something that will happen, for example, internally, or, you know, there are some situations where there's no contract required. Then we can also have like attach an agreement. When the agreement is fully executed, we'll attach it in Nagano, and then we'll close the contract trigger. And when we close the contract trigger, it will mean that you're able to start the study or the collaboration with the contract that is attached. But be careful, because sometimes, let's say you have 15 participating sites and you only have one agreement that is signed. Well, the collaboration can start with that site that you have an agreement with, as long as they also have a RIB approval. So there are a lot of things to check, right? And the RIB wants all the agreements to be attached into Nagano. So you have 15 participating sites, you have one agreement with a CRO, you have agreements with service providers. In theory, they want all of these agreements to be attached in Nagano. All right. Now I will give the floor to Caroline again, because we're going to talk about two real life examples of complicated trials and their agreements that we had to work on. So Caroline, back to you.
Thank you. As Costa said, two challenging cases. I'm gonna try to keep it concise, since we have like 10 minutes just to finish. So here it's a COVID case. It's an intervention clinical trial where the study protocol was written by the PI and a corporate partner. So the corporate partner had the drug and wanted to use for repurpose the drug for COVID. And along with our PI, they wrote the protocol together for that purpose. So the decision was that the RI-MUHC would be the sponsor of the study. The corporate partner would become responsible for supplying the drug and providing the funding. We had participant sites in Canada and the US. Again, since this is COVID, the decision was to send the drug directly to each participant subject. So you may see that it start becoming a challenge. Not only we have an outside partner that is doing more than just funding, because he's responsible for the drug as well, but the drug is being sent to a participant site. The drug was not done by the corporate partner. They sign an agreement with the manufacturer that was providing the drug. So that's why they're responsible. But at the end of the day, they had an agreement with a third party. They are not the ones providing the drug, manufacturing the drug. There are a lot of third-party services providing nursing, tests. So we needed to do that along with negotiating the interinstitutionals. What was decided was that all the IP of the drug would belong to the corporate partner, and the data would be co-owned by the corporate partner, the PI, and the RI-MUHC. And here, again, just to confirm what we have been saying, so we had an agreement with the corporate partner where we decided how the ownership of IP and data would be split. And then we needed to mirror all of that in the investigating initiated agreements with the sites, to tell them that there's a corporate partner involved, they own the IP, and we co-own the data. So that's how we needed to put together the pieces, and that the corporate partner would also be responsible for the drug if there's any adverse event or whatever. Thank you, Magnus. So as I was saying, we have in this case, we had a research agreement between the RI, the PI, the corporate partner, where everything was decided in terms of IP, data ownership, how the drug would be provided, indemnifications, responsibilities. The corporate partner had a separate agreement with the drug manufacturer. We had 3 services agreement between DRI, the PI, and third parties to provide services related to the study. And then we had also interinstitutional agreements between RI, PIs, and participant sites. All that puzzle, again, is interesting because we also need to decide who is going to be participating in each agreement. So this is also, if you have the whole picture, it's easier for us to decide who needs to be, for example, in this case, the corporate partner was not a party in the interinstitutional agreements, but they had to sign acknowledging, because they were responsible for supplying the drug, if there's any indemnification related to the drug, they would be also responsible, and they own the IP. And co-own the data with us. So they needed to sign the interinstitutional agreements as well, since they somehow were related to those agreements. So it was very challenging. This specific case, for our surprise, was not covered by the DARS because of the structure. They didn't like the idea of having the drug supplied directly to the participant subjects. Most of the sites are not in Canada or outside the Quebec. They're just us as a site. We had challenge also with the R&B. I know that every time we're doing new kinds of trials, sometimes when you're the first one doing it, you may face some challenges. So here they decided to have the R&B just for the Canadian part of the study, and they had a private R&B for the US sites because they thought that would be faster. Because again, since you have sites in Canada and sites in the US, you need to have approvals from Health Canada and FDA. So, and this needs to go in parallel, otherwise you'll not be able to start the study at the same time. For the challenges, again, a lot of challenge concerning indemnification, specifically because of this is a new study, involves a drug that is supplied by a third party, so on, is a repurposed drug. It's a disease that is still under a lot of research. The drug supply that would go directly to the participant subjects. Who is responsible, for example, returning and destroying the drug if there's any left, if you're supplying the drug directly to the participants. So this is something we needed to discuss with the sites. Governing line jurisdiction, every time we negotiate with US sites, they just want to have their own governing line jurisdiction. So this is something that also took us time to negotiate, trying to maybe use defendant's law, where we'd go to them and then to us, depending on who is starting the discussions. So this was very interesting. As you may see, there are a lot of things. There's not just drafting the agreements, but that's putting together the structure, deciding who will be signing what kind of additional agreements we need, what kind of insurance are we covered, we're not covered, what should we do? So there are a lot of things that are more than just putting together the agreements, and that's why sometimes it takes a bit longer, because drafting the agreement sometimes is the easiest part. It's putting together the structure that sometimes it's better to take a bit more time to put together the right structure and then start drafting than being needed to go back and redrafting and redoing things just because we discovered that we needed to include a clause that was in the funding agreement or in the manufacturer or in the agreement with the manufacturer of the drug. So that's why, again, we repeated ourselves a bit, but putting together the structure from the beginning, discussing everything, and understanding really what is going to happen is very helpful for us to put together the contract structure for the study.
Thanks, Caroline. Caroline is very good, okay? With this experience, now all the other projects are gonna seem super easy. So my experience is not that complicated. It's a bit simpler. So it was a COVID protocol written by one of our investigators, which was using a drug, like she said, under a new indication. So of course, we had to obtain or to submit a clinical trial application to Health Canada to obtain a non-objection letter. The RI-MUHC is the sponsor. The investigator is the medical director. The corporate partner is responsible for the supply of the drug. So they supply the drug for free and also some funding. I said here 3 sources for funding. So there was the corporate partner giving drug and some funding, then another entity and another one. The sites were all in Canada, so that made it a little bit more simple. We had to have some conversations with our pharmacy at the MUHC so that they can receive the drug and then redistribute to the participating sites. And they also have to prepare the labels because we have to relabel the drug as per the new indication. And we also had a CRO that was involved. Now, talking about the agreements a little bit more. So, like I said, the agreements for the funding, one of the challenge, and I'm not sure, I may have, it may be in the next slide, but the thing is that one of the entities is giving co-funding based on the other funding that we're receiving. And when this happens, it becomes like, I guess, it's a little bit of a puzzle because one of the entities will only give funding if the 2 others will give funding, and then only give like a percentage of whatever we obtain from the 2 other entities. So that can be tricky because if at one point, one of the 2 funding entities decides to withdraw from the collaboration or give less money, then there's an impact on all the other agreements. And then we have to amend the other agreements because the co-funding is matching funds. So if we receive less, then they will give less. Anyway, so everything is interconnected, right? The agreement with the CRO managing the study, what we needed to be careful about was not to pay them money that we would not receive. So let's say we had like milestones that we had to follow with the funding entity or the corporate partner. They were only giving us money when we would recruit, 5 patients, then an extra 5 patients, then an extra 5 patients. So we did not want to give money upfront to the CRO for money we didn't have. So we tried to mirror the same milestones with the CRO. So we had to convince them that we would not pay all the hours that would be worked probably if they were not attached to results. Like we want patients to be recruited. If it takes you 10 hours, 20 hours, whatever, you're going to receive the money only when you help us recruit that many patients. We had like the interinstitutional agreements. So we need to be very careful because if the funding is coming from 3 sources, you may have different conditions in these 3 agreements and you have to make sure that you're imposing all the conditions that you have on the participating sites. Okay. So as I said, the challenge was to make sure there was no contradiction between the clauses and the obligations. We also had to really clarify what obligations we were keeping and what were the obligations that we were delegating to the CRO, so that there was no confusion on who's doing what. Okay, so in our example, the CRO was submitting the clinical trial application to Health Canada for a non-objection letter in our name. So we were named there, but they would do the paperwork. Then they have negotiated the budgets with the participating sites in advance, so we didn't have to do this. They managed the study and they were reporting the SAEs. Oh, now, Caroline, we have the last slide, and I think we didn't decide who will talk about it. If you want, I can do it.
No, go on.
Okay, so just our lessons learned. So it's really important. I put like in blue the keywords. Communicate with the contracts office. That's very key. And communicate everything so that we have a good idea of what's going on and what will happen, and we can better help you. Payments need to be done once the money is available, right? So we do not agree to pay things in advance when, you know, we have to follow the milestones or whatever conditions to impose that on the third parties that we're having contracts with. Negotiating with different institutions in different countries can be challenging. They have different laws, different ways of doing things. So it's another layer of complexity in your project. Being a sponsor means being responsible for a lot of different things and for all the sites that will be added in the future. We had this situation where there was a sponsor in Canada for a protocol, for example, and we wanted, like, one of our investigator wanted to add herself to the project, but you know, we need to have an agreement with the sponsor. So once you're the sponsor in Canada, you're the sponsor for all the Canadian sites that will want to participate in the trial. So you will have to have agreements with them. You know, it's a big responsibility. And then Health Canada can come and can audit you as the sponsor, just to check if you're doing your job properly.
And last thing here, just please don't send templates without consulting us. Sometimes we receive templates back that were more or less already negotiated in templates that the language you're not using anymore. So please talk to us before sending anything out. You can start, you know, putting ideas together in an old template, but run it by us before, because maybe we have a better version, a more complete one. We need to understand the whole project to see if that one fits. So I think this is
You're right. And it's really rare that we have one template that will apply to all the situations. It's like, it's never happening, right? Every story is different. So we always have to tweak whatever template we have to adjust, we have to add clauses, take out some of the clauses. So yeah. All right.
If I may jump here, Kaberi, before we move to questions, just to wrap it up. Obviously, we didn't present much of the other areas that if we have biospecimens being involved and what agreements should be there. Of course, CORE is doing a lot of data transfer agreements, and is the core of our core activities comes from the CORE in terms of data. So we can have a different lecture series if you went just on that. And I assume the burning question in the room is why it takes that long? I think the audience here got a flavor today why these agreements are so complex. And myself, not being a lawyer, I always have nice arguments with my colleagues that agreements are not just legal documents, correct? We need to understand the science. So we start from the science. That's why, as Marie-Lou and Caroline mentioned, the protocols, we review the protocols, we go through the protocols to make sure that the legalese reflects what's in the protocol. It's business terms for the PI, for the institute, in terms, for example, are we giving away some intellectual property that we should be retaining? And of course, the ethics. So all this needs to be wrapped up into a legal document, correct? So it's not just a quickie cutter that agreement A will fit all the other needs. So unfortunately, that's why it's complex, and that adds into the timelines. Also, the inconsistency across Canada in terms of the various institutions have different policies, different guidelines. So I will just stop here, and obviously we'll be happy to take questions from the group.
Thank you for a really great presentation. And I think you're absolutely right that it gave an excellent overview of the complexity involved. The chat is open. Yes, there we go. So Dr. Ezer asks, can you explain when we would have a consortium type agreement and the advantage, disadvantage, I guess, as opposed to the interinstitutional agreements? I don't know, Carolyn, you were speaking about that. If you want to talk.
I'll go. What we have been using consortium agreements, and that have been very helpful when, for example, you have a group of institutions and PIs that have the intention of working together for the next 10 years on a specific disease. They don't have, they are running different studies under that same idea of finding the cure for that disease or whatever they're looking for. So the advantage of a consortium agreement is that you have just one agreement. The one I did not long ago was one where we had all Canada institutions. They were already working together, and they want to put a frame on that, like a framework on the work they were doing. So there are different projects that would go under that umbrella agreement that became the consortium. So the consortium had all the policies concerning data sharing, IP, publications, how they should be doing when they get funding. Not all of them would participate in all the projects, so how it goes. Data sharing between them, for example, if you had one project and then somebody else is starting a new one, how would be easier to share data between them. So we had already a template for that kind of sharing, data sharing in the agreement. So that is, mainly is the advantage. So everything was like discussed beforehand. So every time you have a new project, you don't go again discussing the same things because everything is already in the consortium. I think the disadvantage is the time frame for that, because it took me a year and a half to have it done and signed, and we're talking about only Canadian institutions. I have another one where there's 3 international institutions concerned that it's been a year and almost a year and a half, and we still haven't signed because we are still negotiating things like privacy issues, governing line jurisdiction, who owns the data. And for that specific project that I'm mentioning now, is for one project. So sometimes it takes so long to be negotiating one agreement for one project that at the end of the line you lose too much time that you don't have. So sometimes it's easier to just focus on negotiating separately, because sometimes you can abide to a specific request, you can accept something that maybe the other institution would not accept. So the back and forth can be long. So I think when you have this kind of project where you want to put together a framework for a big project where the studies will come below, is just to ensure that everybody is working together, that can be a good choice. But if it involves international sites, if it's just for one project, I probably would suggest interinstitutional separately, because it probably will go faster.
So it sounds, sorry, Costas, so it
Yeah,
sounds.
if I may jump in there, and Nicole, the classical example that I always give in the consortia is if you, I'm pretty sure you're aware of the CLSA of Tina Wolfson and Western. That's kind of my classical example of a good consortium that is put at the beginning, and as Caroline said, then you set it in stone. Yes, it takes time to set it up, but with the proper governance, then everybody knows what to expect from publications, data sharing agreements, industry collaboration. So ideally, I prefer the consortia kind of agreements because you put the governance infrastructure and structure from day one. And we've done one that Caroline mentioned in pediatrics. We've done one on bone osteoporosis with Suzanne Morin. But I think our classical example would still be CLSA that has a magnitude of data points, and then how are the collaborations under that those auspices. So I agree with Caroline that for multi complex projects, the consortia is probably the way to go.
It sounds like if
That's
you
very
have
helpful.
a network, that would be the goal.
Something that will take time, you're gonna be existing for a long
A long
period,
time.
and yeah.
Nicole, did you have any follow-up questions to that?
No, that pretty much answers my my questions. Thanks. That's really helpful.
As we're waiting in the chat, I have a question. So can we be, you were talking about the DARS insurance, and I think this really marks our evolution from being a mom and pop organization to hopefully being something a bit more organized and even more professional. Is it fair to assume that when we've gone through your office and we've been establishing contracts and we're registering our trials, that the DARS part, if there were any issues, you would have alerted us that, by the way, this is an issue or that is an issue? Is that?
Maybe I can answer this one, Caroline. I was gonna say. Usually we identify the problems at the beginning.
Okay.
Challenges.
Oh, sorry, challenges. I'm not using the right vocabulary. So that's why we need the conversation before to know, okay, what is the project? What is your intentions? What are you going to do? With whom will you collaborate? So usually we try to think about these things at the beginning, so that there's no surprise. But just with COVID, for example, we were surprised because we didn't know that they wanted to know of the COVID projects when we are the sponsor, of course. But things evolve, and apparently the DARS will prepare a new document that was supposed to be prepared for April 1st. I think it's late, but they update their PAC, like the exhibit that deals with clinical trials. They update it, and maybe Caroline has more information because I see that she unmuted herself.
No, it's that it just came from a DARS meeting. That's why I wanted to say. But I think the challenge, before I say anything else, is just that the DARS, and they have said that today at the meeting, they don't have enough hands to handle what they need to handle. So what happens sometimes is that it's not that we didn't see that there was going to be a problem or anything. Sometimes we just, because to submit the study to the DARS, they need a couple of, not a couple, they need a list of documents. Like they need at least the draft of the interinstitutional, they need the protocol, they need the approval from R&B, they need a lot of things that only come after some time where we already start working on the documents, the study is already being prepared to start. And then it takes them 6 months sometimes to give you an answer like, I won't cover you. So what now? Because they do need to they have some kind of, I don't feel it's like super straightforward. Because they dig in, they look into things. So in the example I gave you, it took them 3 months to tell us that, oh, I'm sorry, we're not covering you. But why?
Okay.
So sometimes we do everything from the start, well done, everything is ready. We send them all the documentation, but we just are caught up by surprise, like when they say, no, we're not covering you. Just need to find some private insurance. What they're trying to do now And this was a bit a bit discussed today, because the others, there's a couple of institutions at this meeting. Is like a meeting with them to try to discuss a few topics, and everybody's complaining about the same thing. Why it takes so long to have an answer from you guys? You know, it's stopping. Sometimes everything is ready to start and we cannot start because we don't have confirmation of insurance.
Right.
They told us they're trying to have, because today what happened is that all the institutions in Quebec have the same policy. We're under the same policy. So what concerns them is that if one institution had some kind of a problem and takes 2 million out of that policy, the other institutions will not be covered anymore because the money is out. You know, we use that, all of that. So they are trying to have separate insurance for each institution. And the discussion was, well, but what that means, are we going to be negotiating by ourselves? Are going to be paying more because we're not talking as a group anymore? So these are things that I think they're going to prepare something to show to the institutions what exactly they are proposing, but it's something that will not come this year. We're probably working on for next year, because now I think they're renewing the park as it is. But again, they're supposed to send us the new summary for this year, where it's more or less like a summary of the policy itself, trying to explain to us exactly what is covered by that insurance and what is not. So we need to talk to them. So yeah, the DARS today, it's a challenge for us as well.
But it's always part of the checklist. Yes, go ahead, Costas.
Just the last thing again, the short answer to your question is yes, we would have flagged any issues in terms of DARS non-covering.
Yeah.
The challenge is, as my colleague says, the timeline by which DARS takes to review all the documentation. And if you have Canadian sites or international, is a list of questionnaires and documents, and they have a checklist. If anything does not check in their checklist, automatically we're disqualified from the insurance. But we find out 3-4 months later. So for the COVID projects, I was able to push it, and we got management approval that yes, the PIs can buy individual separate insurance from their grants or other sources. So that represents a problem, because in many of the budgets we may not have this flexibility of soft funding. The other option that I've been discussing with Michael Bernier is that given where DARS is going with the M3S, is that the institutions are going to come together, get the power of the multi-institutional additional coverage, but then each one of us will be paying our own premium. So then for studies that are not covered by PARC, we'll have the flexibility very quickly to be able to get the additional insurance, because it defeats the purpose if we have to wait for 3-4 months to get an answer, especially in the midst of the pandemic. So it still is a challenge, but I think we have a means by which we're resolving it. And also, just to clarify, the M.UHC has the DARS insurance, and we are covered under the M.UHC. Is not an RI-MUHC direct insurance through the DARS.
Maybe if I can add that, because I worked elsewhere before, we have lots of investigators here. It's the biggest in Quebec. So that's why also we are maybe a little bit scary for the DARS, because we have so many like bright investigators that are creative. They are kind of going further, you know, like sending the drug to the patient's house and giving them an app to enter the data. It's because it's innovative. It's like if the DARS is not following, or we're kind of pushing them to innovate, right?
Yeah, I told you came to the best place, Marie-Luce, at the outset. So there you go. Well, I really want to thank the three of you. I'm sure you're going to get a lot of emails, but this was so good, so informative. And as I say, you know, when we talk about assets and platforms, the contracts office is most definitely one. And I think everybody can appreciate that. Now I'm kind of worried. I think we all have to build a year into every grant in order to just get through some of these processes, but what can you do? Hopefully it won't be as bad as that. So thank you everyone, and have a wonderful evening.